Hello and welcome back to Survey of Biology, Unit 13, Section 3. We're going to continue our discussion of evolution, and we'll kind of talk about survival of the fittest, passing the genes on to the next generation. So we're not talking about getting fit like going to the gym and lifting weights or going for a run, but how fit are your genes in terms of being well adapted to the environment and being able to survive and reproduce and pass those genes on to the next generation. So as a quick review, we saw this diagram during section 1, and we're going to kind of break it down into the 4 steps, and we're on kind of step number 3 right now. So in the first section, we talked about overproduction. Every species tends to produce more individuals than can survive. That leads to competition for those limiting resources, whether it's food or water, shelter, or mates. And then number 2, because there's variation in a population, certain individuals are better adapted to the conditions. Those are the ones that are going to survive and have more offspring, which leads to selection. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at right now. We're going to be looking at that competition piece. So what are the selective pressures? Why do some individuals survive that competition better? And then finally, we'll look at, in the last section, kind of the adaptation. How does the survival and reproduction lead to changes in the gene frequency, the genetic makeup of that population? So in terms of competition, we need to kind of look at 2 things that we need to remember as we go through. And so the competition is the fight over sources such as food, shelter, territory, or mates. And there's 2 types. There's intraspecific, so that's within the same species. So that's over here on the right. So the 2 frogs are competing for the same food species. There's also interspecific, which are different species. So the frog and the turtle over on the left might be competing for the same fly there. And the thing to remember here is in competition, it's going to harm both individuals. So they're fighting for a resource, and obviously it harms the individual that doesn't get the fly because they don't have the food, but it also harms the individual that does end up getting the fly because they've got to expend more energy to get that. So it's not a great situation for either of them, but it's what leads to evolution. It's what leads to one organism being able to exploit their adaptation better than another. So here's a quick look at some adaptations that organisms have that give them an advantage over other individuals. And if you look in the upper right hand corner, you may not see anything at first, but if you look real close, there is a lizard on the rock right here, and he camouflages in very, very well. That is a great adaptation, and because of mutations that he has, he may have an advantage over other lizards that aren't as camouflaged as well. If we look over to the left, there are the foot pads of a gecko, and because of the shape and the interaction that those foot pads have, he's able to scale surfaces, like glass straight up, and it gives him a huge advantage over other organisms in terms of being able to escape predators, hunt prey, and whatnot. And down at the bottom, this is a hawk sphinx moss, and you can see that its mouth parts, proboscis, right here, are incredibly long, which allows it to get the nectar out of tube-shaped flowers. So it's become very specialized, and over many, many generations of mutations, they have become very adapted to certain types of flowers. So it allows it to survive better in the competition. Now, anytime there's competition, the animals have certain niches that they tend to inhabit. They could be a carnivore, an herbivore, but something called competitive exclusion will happen. And so when niches overlap, it tends to lead to intense competition. And what competitive exclusion says that 2 species cannot occupy the same niche. So if we look at the top 2 graphs here, on the left there's an organism called P. aurelia. And grown separately, we see this blue line, and its populations increase, nice kind of logistic S-curve growth, and we get very high populations. There's another type of the same organism, different species, P. caudatum, that when it's grown alone, again, we see a nice growth and then leveling off. So individually, both of them do very well in this environment. But when they're put together, if we look at the graph down below and we look at the blue and the brown lines, competitive exclusion takes place. So the blue line, the P. aurelia, is able to outcompete the caudatum, and the caudatum will eventually be excluded and its population will go down to nothing. So that's the idea of competitive exclusion. There's something about P. aurelia that gives it a competitive advantage, a better chance to survive and therefore reproduce than the caudatum in this environment. And here's an example of axis versus white-tailed deer, so two different types of deer. And when they're put together in the same population, so when there is niche overlap, it leads to competition. And in this case, the axis deer is better suited. It's going to end up with a higher population, whereas it looks like the whitetail population is going to end up going down to 0 over this 7-8 year period. So this is competitive exclusion and how selective pressures will favor one individual over another within a population. And now, the way that some animals get around it is they do something called niche partitioning. So here's 5 different species of warblers, and they're all very similar, but what they do is they have adapted to eat different types of insects, to use different parts of the tree. So if you look at the blue areas in the tree above them, there's not a lot of overlap. So the Blackburnian warbler on the far right, it only forages on the very outside of the tree, whereas the Cape May warbler only forages at the very top part of the tree. The yellow-rumped warbler in the middle here forages on the inner branches of the tree. So they have reduced competition. They have become adapted to specific parts of the tree, which is better for all of them because, as we said before, if they were to directly compete with each other, one of the species or multiple numbers of the species would end up becoming extinct from that area for that. So by niche partitioning, they're able to reduce the amount of competition and spread out the use of the resources better. So again, thank you for time, and we will talk to you soon.